Tensions do remain high in South Africa after foreign-owned businesses in downtown Johannesburg were looted overnight. And this came after peace rallies and President Jacob Zuma's call for calm. The country's called for diplomatic support to defeat the demon of xenophobia, but so far we're yet to see the end of the violence. Welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. The events in South Africa will certainly be a key part of this bulletin tonight, but there's plenty more in the pipeline. Candidates for the African Development Bank President post face off in a one and so far only joint appearance. And Kenya's flag carrier will be selling some assets in order to repair its balance sheet. Right then, South Africa has apologized to African countries after xenophobic attacks that have left at least 5 people dead and thousands of immigrants displaced. International Relations Minister Maitengwana Mashabane met African diplomats in Pretoria on Friday to brief them on the situation and to apologize for the violence. This came as police are struggling to contain sporadic protests and looting that have spread from the coastal city of Durban to Johannesburg.
This is how police officers tried to protect the businesses belonging to African immigrants in downtown Johannesburg. Despite their best efforts, looting continued overnight. A local car garage was firebombed. All the stock inside burnt. Business owners returned on Friday morning to try and save what they can.
In time of apartheid, we support the South Africa. So I want the government to understand us, know that we are one.
South Africa has been hit by a wave of violence against African immigrants in the last 2 weeks, which has killed 4 people. Some accuse foreigners of taking their jobs in an attempt to justify these violent actions. But in a country where the unemployment rate stands at 24%, anger and frustration has boiled over again.
These people must go and commit crime where they come from. They don't rob people from where they come from. What does that mean? Is that right for the government? Those in the government are just worried about themselves, not us. We are not going to allow that to happen. At night, the police shoot at us for no reason, and the people buy them food and KFC.
The latest round of violence against African immigrants started in Durban, just days after Zulu King Goodwill Zwelithini said in remarks reported by local media that foreigners should leave South Africa. He has since said his comments were misinterpreted. In 2008, more than 60 foreigners were killed in similar unrest as locals vented frustrations over various issues, particularly a lack of jobs in the continent's most advanced economy. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Now, in reaction, companies employing South Africans outside South Africa are now fearing for their safety. The synthetics maker Sasol announced on Friday that it is repatriating 340 South Africans working at its projects in Mozambique. Now, work on some of its projects has been halted temporarily as a result of that repatriation efforts. Now, let's expand this conversation and reel in Angelo Coppola. He's been covering these developments in Durban. He's in Johannesburg for us tonight. Miriam Bemard also joins us as well from London. Angelo, I understand the violence spread to Port Elizabeth earlier today. What happened?
Well, all we know is that it seems to have, as one opposition political person put it to me earlier, in fact on Tuesday, that there seems to be some form of orchestration here. We don't know exactly what sparked the events in in Port Elizabeth, unfortunately. But at the moment, the situation is tense and police are monitoring. I have to say, Raman, though, that police in the different cities are reacting differently to these xenophobic attacks. We've seen in Durban specifically where they react very quickly as soon as there's a spark. In Johannesburg, we're starting to hear that police tend to back off a little and watch the situation before doing anything incisive. So we'll have to see how it plays out in Port Elizabeth. Raman?
Indeed. Miriam, how are investors on your end of the world reacting to these disgraceful events in South Africa?
Well, investors remain keen, actually, despite all of this, with leading global investment banks, securities and investment management firms like Goldman Sachs, for example, staying quite bullish in the long term. You know, the country is still seen as a favorable destination for fund managers because of the depth of its capital market and, of course, the scarcity of other EM options. Despite the energy problems, the country's export volumes actually rose more than 16% year on year, and South Africa has also taken on 3 rounds of renewable energy bids for independent power producers to try to help the blackout situation. Despite the problems, of course, that we've seen with Eskom, South Africa has actually imported and purchased power from independent producers, helping to actually boost supply by 8% overall, trying to alleviate the pressure there.
Indeed. Angelo, let's get back to you. Given his comments about a fortnight or so ago, are the authorities contemplating any action at all against the Zulu monarch? And if not, why?
The short answer, Raman, is nothing's happened as yet. But all is not lost, as some would tell you, because we've just heard earlier this week that a Cape Town resident has laid a charge of hate speech against the king. That's 2 weeks after the fact, unfortunately. There's no word whether government is going to plan any action or not, because you need to remember that President Zuma is a Zulu, and essentially King Goodwill Zwelithini is his monarch or his king. So this may complicate any action. Having said that, there was a meeting earlier this week between the king and the rising political star known as Malusi Gaba. They had a meeting because the two of them had had a spat in the media about who said what and who shouldn't say what, and this spat carried on for about 2 days. We understand, though, that the meeting went well, Raman, whatever that means.
Indeed. Miriam, between the persistent power blackouts, the strikes, and now, of course, this wave of xenophobic attacks, how exactly are European investors positioned on South Africa?
Well, I mean, it's certainly raising some of the similar concerns, investors had last year with the miners' strike. It's the ongoing uncertainty that's prompting a cautious tone. But let's not forget that the country is grappling with a 24% unemployment rate, and this is certainly causing clashes with immigrant workers in South Africa as well. Addressing Parliament in Cape Town on Thursday, President Jacob Zuma reiterated his condemnation, of course, of the violence, calling it a violation of South Africa's values. But many experts and investors on this end are saying that the government actually needs to do more to deal with the domestic problems like low wages, high unemployment, and a lack of corporate incentive to actually help generate more activity among local businesses.
Indeed. Finally, Angelo, we've seen a little earlier in the bulletin Sasol announcing plans to repatriate South African nationals from Mozambique. Are there other plans, similar plans rather, to do so or to do something similar by South African companies elsewhere?
Well, the Sasol story is quite interesting because they also have a plant in Nigeria which is operated by Chevron. And according to the Sasol spokesperson, there are no issues there, I'm told, but they are monitoring the situation and will probably react accordingly. There are several big South African companies who haven't responded with any of their plans or proposals yet. Companies like Shoprite, Standard Bank, Absa, SAB Miller, and then of course there's MTN, which has a major presence across the country. But there's no question that you can bet your bottom dollar here that the risk management teams in those countries, for those companies, are looking at the situation and watching it quite closely, Raman.
Indeed, and having a few sleepless nights in the process. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your input. Angelo Coppola live in Johannesburg and Miriam Bemard live in London. Now, let's move on to something quite different. Next month, the African Development Bank will be holding its annual meeting in Cote d'Ivoire right at the end of May, with an especially important item on the agenda, the election of the bank's next president. Ahead of that vote, our correspondent Andrea Arenas caught up with the candidates in their one and only joint campaign event at a meeting in Washington, D.C.
One of these candidates will serve the next 5 years as president of the African Development Bank. Whoever gets the job will have a full inbox, addressing energy shortages, finding around $92 billion a year to fill the gap in funding Africa's infrastructure, and improving the livelihoods of the continent's poorest people.
When you look at the tremendous resources that the continent has, one is mesmerized as to why is it that we have such a rich continent, but where we have such a great number of poor people. That is the biggest challenge in my view.
Nigeria is the bank's largest shareholder, and it's backing the country's current Minister of Agriculture, Akinwumi Adesina.
Clearly, I would want to build a lot more in terms of transparency, accountability within the bank systems to basically strengthen that integrity system. But that also has to be done at the country level as well to be sure that funds are actually going to where it's supposed to go. And this is why I believe, actually, for the bank, needs to be closer to its clients and listen more to the clients. So you're from one of those countries, to be sure that the bank is actually doing what it says it's going to do, and the funds are actually going to where it's supposed to go.
And if Cabo Verde's finance minister, Cristina Duarte, gets the top job, she'll be the first woman to hold the position.
I think that it's time for African policymakers, together with their partners, to adopt a long-term view, to adopt a strategic view, so that innovation becomes one item in our agendas, and Africa can finally become a player in the global marketplace.
The bank's board of governors will vote on which of these hopefuls is the best fit for the position when it meets in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, at the end of May. The current president, Rwandan Donald Kaberuka, is one of the bank's most successful leaders, steering it through the global financial crisis and keeping its credit rating intact. He leaves after having served 2 terms, the maximum allowed, and passing on big shoes for his successor to fill. Andrea Arenas, CCTV, Washington.
Now, earlier on, I did speak to one of those 8 candidates, Nigeria's agriculture minister at the moment, Akinwumi Adesina from Washington, D.C. Now, for most of Donald Kaberuka's tenure, the African Development Bank has focused very strongly on infrastructure, especially energy. I started my conversation with Dr. Adesina by asking him if he would retain that strategic focus on infrastructure or if he would broaden it out to include an emphasis, for example, on labor mobility within Africa.
Well, first let me start with the kind of Africa that I envision. I envision an Africa that is, has a lot of significant amounts of growth with shared prosperity, with inclusive growth. An Africa where the African countries are well connected to each other, and so that in terms of regional integration. But an Africa that's also connected to the rest of the world and therefore globally competitive. We have to develop an Africa where the young people can have hope and have, expectations that they can actually have those hopes met. An Africa we want to live in, not an Africa that people want to move away from. And in my vision for the bank, I've listed 5 ways of getting to this new Africa. First and foremost is infrastructure. But what I'm going to focus on is smart infrastructure. Asking the question, infrastructure for what? We need infrastructure, we need roads, we need ICT infrastructure, but the most important infrastructure for me is energy. Today, Africa generates only 174 gigawatts of power. That is about the same size of power for Spain or Belgium. So my first priority is energy for all in Africa. ICT infrastructure is critical, but also infrastructure to actually help Africa to deal with urbanization problem that it has. The second area that I'm going to focus in for the bank is about private sector to unlock wealth and prosperity on the continent, in particular for SMEs, which are very critical on the continent. The third area is going to be about jobs. We've got to create jobs for a lot of young people. So jobs for young people and jobs also for women. The fourth area is what we were talking about agriculture, but it's going to be within the context of reviving Africa's rural economies.
Indeed. Let's focus on something that you mentioned there, regional integration. More often than not, we focus on customs duties, we focus on taxes, but we haven't really focused, including the AfDB, on the movement of labor across markets in Africa. And this, of course, does tend to have a very significant effect on the mobility of labor, rather, contributing to growth across the board. If you do become the next president of the African Development Bank, what policies will you push for in labor mobility, especially across sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, if you take a look at it today, you've got roughly 13 million young people that are entering the labor market every year, and they can't find jobs. And that means we have a demographic dividend as a continent. But the key is to how to turn that demographic dividend right into an economic dividend. And that means we have to do a number of things very quickly. That's why my strategy about jobs is very important. We've got to build a lot of skills for these folks. We've got to make sure that we build entrepreneurship and have pension, to have venture capital funds that can allow them to build their businesses and be able to do those businesses across countries. I mean, I've done this in Nigeria where I helped to set up a venture capital fund, private equity fund to support young SMEs in Africa. However, as we build that, we also have to reduce the skills gap between what the labor market wants and the kind of skills that people have. So we have to do that. But at the end of the day, look, what sense does it make if I am somebody living in, maybe you're in Nairobi and the labor market in Uganda needs a lawyer and you can't go and walk over there. Labor market mobility will be facilitated when we have skills, a lot of highly talented people, but we must also make it easier for people to move across countries. Look, sometimes it takes forever, just an African to move from one country to another. It's easier to go to Europe or United States. So actually having freer movement of people across borders is very important. But labor market integration, as well as financial market integration across the region, is very critical to actually having the regional integration we are talking about.
My conversation there with Nigeria's agriculture minister and, of course, one of the 8 candidates to become the next president of the AFDB. Quick run to the markets here for you. Red numbers coming through from South Africa. JC All Share down by over 1%. Elsewhere, however, different numbers coming through. The 20-share index up by about over a quarter. And, of course, the Nigerian Stock Exchange also up by about half a percentage point. Global Business takes a short break, but there's plenty more coming up. We'll see you in 30.
Sustainable development and a commitment to developing partnerships with Africa. Some of the key phrases already used at the Africa Global Business Forum here in Dubai.
There is a need for a predictable environment in which investors have to put their money.
Welcome back to the program. You're still watching Global Business Africa from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Kenya Airways, the national carrier of the East African nation, is wrapping up a process to restructure its finances, rebuild its balance sheet, but it's also seeking bridge financing. Its CEO, however, remains a bit cagey about exactly how much money the airline is looking for, even as it sells assets from planes to land in order to buy time to repair its balance sheet.
In the first half of the 2014-2015 financial year, the airline reported losses of over $140 million. Since then, the news coming out of Kenya's national carrier has become much, much worse. Last month, Managing Director Mbuvi Ngunze said the firm was using debt to pay its staff. By end September 2014, the airline had over $750 million in liabilities. Long-term debt had also soared by 89% to over $1 billion compared to the first half in 2013. In order to repair its balance sheet, KQ has had to cut costs.
We took a decision as a board to reduce capacity, so to take out capacity. That's why we are selling 4 777s, and effectively that will bring down our ASKs. But remember, at the same time, we have also in the last year brought in Dreamliners, 6 of them, and we have also brought in which were replacement for 767, and we have 3 777-300s. So even though we don't have the full ASK complement we wanted, we feel that we can operate at a more responsible level based on the market outturn with lower ASKs.
Selling the Boeing 777-200s and retiring the 10 pilots who flew them angered the pilots' union. That dispute is now in conciliation with the pilots' union and the Ministry of Labour. The sale of the larger 777-200s was partially offset by the acquisition of 787 Dreamliners. But doesn't a smaller fleet of about 40 aircraft imply that more staff cuts are on the way?
We are evaluating our options today in terms of what's the best, most responsible way to go ahead. In fact, we have held back a number of appointments even in the recent past because we've been trying to operate within a certain responsible number.
Whereas rivals like fast-growing aggressive Ethiopian Airlines have a much lower wage bill, KQ's managers have had to deal with aggressive unions but also convince staff to boost their productivity at a time when cash flow is extremely tight and Kenya, KQ's base, faces a perception problem. Between 2013 and 2014, incoming tourist traffic has fallen by over 20% to barely over 860,000. The Garissa attack, which exposed the government's unwillingness and inability to reform its internal security, is likely to make matters worse. Well ahead of the close of its financial year, the airline issued a profit warning. Brent crude prices may have fallen by about half compared to June 2014, but it's not given Kenya Airways any breathing room.
From a cost point of view, we have seen the benefit of the fuel cost in our P&L. But from a financing point of view, today we are actually paying counterparties. Up to October, they were paying us. For the last 3 years, we've been receiving money from the counterparties.
This was not part of the 10-year plan the airline's management presented to shareholders in a rights issue in 2012. Back then, the 777-200s were an integral part of servicing the 9 new destinations, including Sao Paulo, Brazil, which it was to add in the 2014-2015 fiscal year. Now, they're gone. The question is, did the airline expand too fast at too high a cost?
Today, with the benefit of hindsight, probably some of the capacity probably could have been trimmed, but that's hindsight is 2020.
A survey of airline CFOs by IATA in April had most of them report a rise in profitability. KQ is certainly not among those airlines. And for now, shareholders and staff are waiting for a turnaround plan and some hard numbers to back it. Valdi Carosa, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Rwanda's President Paul Kagame and the Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn met in Addis Ababa. While there, they witnessed the signing of cooperation agreements. It will see the two countries share electricity and agricultural expertise, among other matters. Ethiopia has seen years of high-level economic growth in the high digits. Rwanda has received international recognition as one of the easiest countries in Africa in which to do business. Both countries are focused on growing their economies by making them Africa's preferred top destinations for international capital. Ethiopia has embarked on the construction of a series of hydroelectric dams in order to export power right across East Africa.
The issues of integration in the region was our agenda item, and we decided that there will be electricity interconnection between our two countries through the regional pool, and that integration will help us to boost, to transform our economies into industrial economy. And we also agreed to share experience.
The very fact that Ethiopia, with its diversity in its huge population, the second in Africa, there is a lot that is there for Ethiopia itself. There is a lot that is there for the friends and partners of Ethiopia that we can tap into to prepare our two countries to greater heights.
Quick run through commodity prices here for you. The Baker Hughes rig count continues to fall, and in the opposite direction, crude prices continue to rise. That's Brent crude for you, well over $64 a barrel, posting some relatively modest gains, but still building steam over the last couple of months. Next, we'll introduce you to the only product that's not under a US trade embargo, but Sudan isn't making the most of it, at least not yet. We'll tell you why. Welcome back to the program. Let's talk about gum arabic. It's made out of hardened sap, and it's seen as a politically and economically strategic product for Sudan. It's extracted from trees, and this versatile resource is used in just about everything from food to the petroleum industry. With 85% of the world's production of that commodity coming from Sudan, it's also the only product not affected by an American trade embargo. Here's Yasser Hakim with more.
Acacia trees cover 500,000 kilometers squared. That's the size of 4 EU countries. Gum arabic is extracted from acacia trees and taken as raw material to be used in several industries.
Gum arabic is known to be an important part in the industry of food materials, beverages, preservative material for for foods and most of the industries that needs emulsification process. In medicines now it is used for constipation purposes, for kidney failure patients, and for coating of the of many of the tablets and capsules.
Sudan exports an average 60,000 tons, bringing in $3 billion for the state budget. Since the cessation of South Sudan in 2011, oil production for Sudan has dropped by 80%, which made it more dependent on Arab gum as a source of income. But there are several challenges to increase production of Arab gum from forests, such as this one behind me. 5 million people work on extraction of gum, but many now prefer to join the more profitable and fast-growing gold mining industry. But that's not all.
One big problem is that the tools used for extraction are very old. Another problem is smuggling to neighboring countries. This needs to be addressed.
The government had to act, and with the funds from the World Bank, it is trying to develop this suffering industry.
The program now is, directed towards the revitalization of the gum Arabic sector, but it is concentrating on the establishment of agricultural association, gum Arabic producers associations, and this is maybe one of the the ways through which we can solve the problem of financing. They have not yet tried the tools or the new tools or the new techniques of tapping or harvesting. Still, our people are using the old axe.
Sudan is only producing 8% out of the existing trees. Imagine the income if it produces its full capacity. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Khartoum, Sudan.
Quick run through the currencies here for you. The gain that we did see in the South African rand yesterday, that essentially wiped off the map completely today. Combination of factors here, but one of the key ones, of course, are investor sentiments around the continuing power cuts that, of course, are hitting that country quite badly. 12.09 to the dollar is a relevant number that we're looking at. The Kenyan shilling, of course, still relatively weak, around 93.40, 93.50 to the greenback as well. And that's it for this edition of the program. Do remember, you can send your feedback to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And of course, whenever we're off air, Facebook and Twitter are your ports of call. We'll see you right here on Monday. I'm Ramanya.